Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about attachment styles in astrology, how you can see what type of attachment style a person or you yourself might have based on aspects in your birth chart or in a natal chart in general. And I have this cool background up in my room right now and I haven't taken it down, so I thought I'll just film in front of it. It actually kind of looks cool. I might keep doing this. So this is a bit of a longer topic. So I'm going to break this video down into parts. So I'm going to start the video off by discussing the different types of attachment styles and then how they're influenced by parenting styles that we were raised under by our caretakers. And then I'll finish off the video by talking about how you can look for the type of attachment style you or another person might have based on aspects in your birth chart. I'll leave timestamps down in the comments and in the description so that you can just jump to a different part of the video if the beginning gets too long. So there's one really famous theory on attachment styles, and that was developed by Mary Ainsworth, and she described 4 patterns of attachment. Secure attachment, which is a normal attachment where the child explores their environment and protests separation. There's avoidant attachment, which is when the child withdraws and explores their environment without regard for their caretaker. And they also ignore separations and avoid reunions when their caretaker reemerges. There's ambivalent attachment, where they're clingy, they refuse to explore their environment, and they protest separation strongly. There's also disorganized attachment, where the child shows little emotion at separation and confusion at reunion. So that's like the main theory that most people know when you talk about attachment styles. But I also want to dive into another one that was developed by 2 people, and I don't know their names off the top of my head, but I will just write it out in the video. I will also link the book that I read this from in the description. So there's, again, 4 types of attachment. There's secure attachment and then 3 other types of insecure attachments, which are preoccupied, dismissive, and fearful. So all these attachment styles describe how a person interacts with others and how they view themselves and their own competence, their own self-efficacy. Secure attachment expresses low anxiety about seeking help, and they also show a low avoidance in seeking out others to fulfill emotional needs. Individuals with dismissive attachment style express low anxiety about needing others, but they have a high avoidance in approaching others when they are distressed. These individuals have an unrealistic view of themselves as highly competent. They view others very negatively as either controlling or hostile or intrusive or unreliable. Usually this attachment style was developed out of a history of emotional deprivation where intimacy felt threatening, so they minimized or denied their need for others. This was the coping strategy that they developed. This is how they felt safe. They expect rejection, so they manage their distress by ignoring it. And they don't really assess their environment correctly because they tend to minimize and deny any real dangers. Because again, they are avoiding having to need others or rely on others or seek others for help or support. So they tend to also show less sensitivity and empathy and nurturance towards others because that wasn't really given to them. Preoccupied attachment style shows low avoidance in seeking help from others, but high anxiety about the reliability of the support that they will get from others. So individuals with a preoccupied attachment style tend to exaggerate their emotional needs. They will magnify their stress because they're very hypervigilant about others leaving them or being unavailable. So this shows up in more clingy behavior, and they tend to demand time and attention from others. And it's stemming from a lack of self-confidence. They see themselves as weak or vulnerable or unlovable. They have either angry or worrisome or even idealistic views about others and how they're able to support their needs. The caretakers for people who developed a preoccupied attachment style were usually self-absorbed and preoccupied with themselves. Their caretaking was unpredictable or inconsistent. The main fear for people with a preoccupied attachment style is abandonment. They can fluctuate between also being self-absorbed or like a self-centered obliviousness towards others, and being intrusive or demanding or overly involved with others. Individuals with preoccupied attachment styles may have experienced more trauma or abuse. Individuals with a fearful attachment style express high anxiety when it comes to both expressing their needs for support and also avoiding being vulnerable with others. So there's kind of like an approach avoidance conflict that they deal with. They fluctuate between dismissive and preoccupied coping styles. So their caregivers were usually simultaneously both a source of security and danger. So they fear needing others and also getting their needs met by others. Attachment styles are influenced by parenting styles, and there's 4 main types of parenting styles. Authoritarian parenting styles involves high control and low affection for children. So the parents or caregivers usually have very high expectations for responsible and mature behavior, but to the point where they can be very demanding. They can use harsh and strict discipline. They rarely explain or communicate rules. The love expression tends to be more instrumental. They might meet the child's basic needs, but they won't show much affection in doing so. So children who grow up under this parenting style learn to hide their vulnerability because it might trigger rejection or disapproval from their caregivers. So they tend to internalize their anger. They don't have a close or affectionate relationships with their caregivers. And they might be obedient and even achieving, but they're also very anxious, depressed, and insecure. They usually just comply with what their parent demands out of fear. And they might try really hard to gain their parents' or caregivers' approval, which means that they can become very harsh and critical towards themselves. The permissive parenting style has a lot of warmth and nurturing and communication, but they don't express appropriate expectations for mature and independent behavior. So these caregivers are more indulgent. They usually set few rules, or they don't consistently follow rules. So the child doesn't receive age-appropriate guidance. Typically, this is because parents don't want to be too harsh. They want their child to love them or be close to them, so there can be some insecurity there. They also might not believe that they have a right to be in charge or instill values and standards. The child ends up having too much control, and parents end up feeling disempowered and might resort to negotiating or bargaining or pleading for the child to behave. So children who are raised under a permissive parenting style don't learn to self-regulate. They can become bossy or angry or dominant towards other kids. They might be disrespectful or argumentative with adults. They might be viewed as self-centered, dependent, and demanding. And underneath this demeanor is an anxiety because they know they're not really safe or protected by their parents, because their parents can't really say no to them. So it's hard for children to respect permissive parents. The parents may act more as friends or appear incompetent. And usually with this parenting style, generational boundaries are blurred. So children can even become parentified with permissive parents, which is a type of conditioned love that ultimately ends up smothering the child. Disengaged parenting styles usually end up being neglectful parenting styles because the caregivers have low control but also low affection. They're usually just uninvolved, either passively, like they're just unresponsive, or they're outright rejecting the child. And they usually have inconsistent or erratic discipline methods. The child may be physically or emotionally abandoned. They learn to hide, which limits the development of their personal identity. And you see disengaged parenting styles often with caregivers who have a substance or alcohol use disorder. They might even expose their child to more dangerous situations in their own home. It can also be due to more severe mental illness, so like chronic depression, unresponsiveness, narcissistic, borderline, or even paranoid personality disorders. And the disengaged parenting style tends to have the worst outcomes for the child. Authoritative parenting style is the most effective, and usually children raised under this parenting style tend to be the most well-adjusted because the caregivers have a high amount of control, but they also express a high amount of affection for the child. They set firm limits for the child, but they're also expressed with affection, and they communicate these limits. They communicate rules. The rules are enforced in a reliable way. They have high expectations for mature and responsible behavior, but also give the child opportunities to make decisions and choices when it's possible for them. Children raised under authoritative parenting styles tend to have greater psychological well-being and success. So depending on the parenting style that we experienced, we all developed our own attachment style. And this shows up in how we interact with and respond to others, how we ask for our needs to be met, and how we respond to the needs of others. Now, in astrology, after all of that, the main ways that you can look at attachment styles in astrology in a birth chart are aspects to the moon and aspects to Venus. So now I'm going to talk about aspects to the moon and Venus, and I'm going to talk about what it means to have easy and hard aspects to both planets. And in this video, easy aspects are going to be the sextile and trine, and sometimes the conjunction, depends on the planet. And the hard aspects are going to be squares, oppositions, and inconjunctions. Also, sometimes the conjunction. Those are the aspects that I'm going to be referring to when I talk about aspects to the moon and Venus. Aspects to the moon. The reason why we look at attachment styles with the moon is because the mother obviously plays a key role, and because of what the moon represents in general. It's not necessarily your mother, but obviously that's a large part of it. But it also tells us about a person's home life and generational stories or patterns or trauma that has been passed down to us. So easy aspects to the moon show how other parts of us are working in harmony with the moon. So these parts were consistent. These needs were consistently met. These parts consistently met the needs of the moon. So we didn't internalize conflicting messages about these parts of ourselves or of life in general and what they represent. So the parts, the planets that are in an easy aspect to the moon were supported and encouraged. And they also supported and encouraged the needs of the moon for those needs to be met. We didn't internalize messages that these parts shouldn't or couldn't work together, or that they couldn't fulfill the needs of the moon. Hard aspects to the moon show these conflicting messages. So these messages involved how we feel about our emotions, our emotional needs, and how they were or weren't responded to. Hard aspects to the moon show the struggles that we face in feeling nurtured and getting our emotional needs met. So they become a habit, because attachment styles become a coping mechanism. They're a way that we kind of just respond to our own needs based on the responses that we got from caregivers, which were based on their parenting style. So the way we then respond to our environment and caregivers becomes our way of self-soothing with the moon. So hard aspects to the moon show that these self-soothing coping strategies can cause more negative outcomes for us, because it might still result in needs not being met, or being met at the cost of either losing something that is represented by the other planet in a hard aspect to the moon, or it's not getting another need met for another part of ourselves, which would be represented by that other planet. Now, aspects to Venus show our relationships with feminine figures in our life. Venus is the original ruler of the second house, so it also shows our stability, our sense of self-worth, our values, and our security. So based on parenting styles, we internalize messages about relationships and our self-esteem, our self-worth, and our self-value. And we learn how to interact with people because it's also the ruler of the seventh. So the aspects to Venus show our expectations that we have of others. What do we feel like we deserve in relationships? What do others deserve from us? How are we going to treat people, and how are we going to expect other people to treat us? So easy aspects to Venus show that our way of interacting with others and how we developed our self-esteem is in tune with that planet, that other part of us. It's easier to achieve balance in relationships when it comes to expressing those parts of us, those planets. I keep saying parts, but parts equals planets in this video. So our self-esteem development is supported because we internalize positive messages about our value and what we're worth and what we deserve. We also internalize positive messages about how these different parts of ourselves can be expressed in relationships in harmonious ways. Now, hard aspects to Venus show that we internalize conflicting messages about relationships and how others should treat us and how we should treat others as well. So maybe we didn't receive a clear message on what healthy or stable relationships look like. So this can negatively impact the judgment that we have about the kind of people that we should partner with. It also shows that we might have internalized negative or conflicting messages about what our value is as an individual and in relationships. Hard aspects to Venus show that there was more difficulty in developing healthy self-esteem. So we can either have a super high self-esteem to overcompensate for a lack of one, or it can be so low that we feel unworthy. So there can be issues with feeling like we have to earn love, or conflicting messages on how we do earn love and what kind of love we deserve. Do we have to be overly self-sacrificing, or are we withholding? All of that depends on the parenting style and the resulting attachment style that we developed. And it's all connected to messages that we internalized about our value. So this is like the coping mechanism that we developed as a way to sustain ourselves, because maybe we weren't taught how to do that, but it might not be helpful, and it might not be helpful to us developing healthy self-esteem, and it might not be helpful in us establishing healthy or stable relationships. So when you're trying to determine an attachment style in a birth chart, look at aspects to your moon and Venus. Are they easy aspects? Are they hard aspects? And what planets are involved? Consider the essential relationship between the moon and Venus and the other planet. So for instance, the moon and Uranus don't really have a harmonious relationship because Cancer and Aquarius are naturally in conjunct signs to one another. So already they have a naturally difficult relationship. And depending on the aspect, if they are in a hard aspect to each other, then that is just going to exacerbate the already difficult relationship that they have. If there is an easy aspect between them, then that can show that some of that is minimized or just worked through with the easy aspect. So when you think about the relationship that they naturally have in the zodiac wheel, then consider what relationship do they have in your chart? What is the aspects that they're making to each other? And how are they acting out that relationship, that aspect? You determine that by the sign that they're coming into. Does that make it better or worse? And to kind of determine that, we'll consider the signs that the planets originally rule and are exalted in. Now the house is showing where this dynamic is playing out the most, what area of life it's going to be occurring in the most in that person's chart. What area of life is most affected by this coping mechanism that was developed as a result of the attachment style. So I would start there, focus more on the moon and Venus, but rulers of houses can also play a role. So like aspects to the 4th, 2nd, 7th house rulers, look at planets in the 4th, 7th, 2nd houses, or also placements of the rulers of these houses. Is the 4th house ruler in the 8th house? Is the 7th house ruler in the 8th house? Things like that. Do these placements or these other layers make it better or worse? Do these placements offer support, or does it just add to the issue? This just adds more layers to what you're already looking at in the chart. So if there's already like a hard aspect to the moon and another planet, and then it's like the moon is in the 8th house, or the ruler of the moon is in the 8th house, or it's making a hard aspect to a planet, and that planet just so happens to be like the ruler of the 8th house. I keep using the 8th house because that's just like the easiest example. That can maybe help you understand what I'm talking about. That just adds layers. It adds more to the story. It adds more to what's going on. So that's how you can look at attachment styles in astrology. And I want to finish the video by saying that we can always work on developing a healthy attachment style. We're not limited by our past, we're not limited by our upbringing, and we're definitely not limited by our birth charts. Astrology is just meant to help us determine what these patterns are so that we are more aware of them and we can recognize them when they come up for us. We can always learn to respond and behave differently and establish better and healthier and more supportive coping patterns. I hope that this video was interesting and it taught you something about attachment styles and how you can look at them in astrology. I do want to continue adding to this topic, so I'm planning on making additional videos about aspects to the moon and Venus from other planets in astrology, so just stay tuned for that. I don't know how long it's going to take me to finish it, but I do have ideas already and I do want to talk about this because I think it's an important topic to talk about, and I think it's interesting that we can actually see this in astrology if you just look at it through this lens, and astrology can be deeper than people realize. Hopefully this offered something that you can use to start looking at your chart or charts in this way to try to unpack this very deep topic. And thank you for watching. I will see you very soon.